the anchor at Fox 11 in Los Angeles. He also does, of course, the syndicated show, The Issue Is, all about California politics and beyond. Elex Michaelson, everybody.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you, sir. Really loved your stuff from the conventions. They were two very different conventions, weren't they, Elex Michaelson?
Very, very different experiences. The Republican one, frankly, was better organized. Logistically, it was easier to get around and a bit better set up. The Democratic one, though, was a bit more fun.
Yeah, and I felt like the moments that lingered might have been more associated with the Democrats than the Republicans. Again, not trying to be partisan, I'm just in just terms of rock star moments, you know.
Well, it's just very different. You think about the two parties. Donald Trump is running as a one-man show, and the Democrats are running as an ensemble play. So you think about the fact, and it really is remarkable, we don't really talk about it, that there is not a single living Republican past member of the ticket who is endorsing Donald Trump. You think about George Bush and Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan and Mike Pence, who ran on the ticket with him last time. None of them are endorsing him. So none of them are there. So the level of speaker that you see on the different nights, I mean, the Democrats with Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, plus their own people, you just don't have that same level at the Republican National Convention. You have other folks like Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan, but they haven't necessarily, had years of government service.
I think you're on to something else as well, which is that some of those to whom you've referred have actually served in Donald Trump's administration, are now coming out and saying in full-page ads and other kinds of media appearances, I wouldn't have anything to do with this guy. He should be nowhere near the White House, and I'm actually voting against him.
Not only some, I mean, think about this. And I don't know why, nobody seems to care about this. But to me, I would think it would be something that people should care about. Donald Trump, these are people that he picked after saying, I only hire the best people. This is the guy who's all about hiring and firing. His vice president, multiple secretaries of state, multiple secretaries of defense, multiple national security advisors, multiple chiefs of staff, who have all worked with him at the highest level in the room, all say he should not be president. These are the guys that he picked. And they say he shouldn't be president. You don't see almost any of them coming out and endorsing him. And yet that fact doesn't seem to really matter to the Republicans at the convention. And even, frankly, isn't really talked about that much with swing state voters.
Speaking of things that won't matter, the re-indictment, I believe, has already been baked into all the numbers as well. I'm sure you're doing something on your show, The Issue Is, about this, at least a reference of some kind. But when you do the political calculus on it, it just really probably won't matter.
Especially the fact that we're not going to see any sort of trial or conviction on that fact before the election. It'll be interesting, though, that the New York case where he was convicted, we expect to see sentencing on that in a couple of weeks. And that is it'll be interesting to see what happens there, where there's actually a resolution. But these issues that, that the January 6th stuff is going to go one of two ways. Either one, he's going to get elected president again, and then he's going to make it go away. Or two, he doesn't get elected president again, and then people don't care as much. I mean, look at how much interest there is right now in the Hunter Biden trials compared to,
thank you,
a few months ago. All of a sudden, it's less interesting. There's an argument that the best thing that could be done for the country, which of course is why it would never happen, is that Donald Trump agrees to just go away, and the criminal cases against him go away too. Basically, sort of the Richard Nixon thing.
Right. That you meant that a deal is struck, essentially.
You're out. Your whole brand is out, but we're not prosecuting you, and you're just out of our consciousness. There's an argument that would be the best thing for the country, best thing for the Republican Party, and the best thing for the Democratic Party, which is why it's never going to happen.
Well, and here's the other thing that isn't spoken of, that in the back rooms of the Republican Party, they'd love to see that happen, even though they've surrendered their party to this man.
A lot of folks would, but then there's, a lot of folks that really feel that way are no longer in those back rooms.
Sure.
That convention, I mean, we talked about it as a one-man show, and if you look at it, usually the nominee only comes the last night, or maybe they come one other night. Donald Trump came out every single night at the convention, and the biggest moment of every night was not any guest speaker. It was when Donald Trump walked out. That party is incredibly loyal to him. He has built it out. The people that are left love him in a way that is hard for, I think, a lot of Democrats to understand. And especially at that moment of the convention, right after he had been shot, when he was running against Joe Biden, the amount of unity and the amount of just adoration for him, and the amount of people that talked about him not only as a political leader, but almost like a religious leader, feeling that God had spared his life in that miraculous moment for him not getting killed, as for him to be a vessel, not only for the Republicans, but a vessel for Jesus to make the country better, was not an insignificant number of people that not only said that on the floor, but also said it in speeches. We heard that as a recurring theme, this idea that Trump is a sort of prophet, that God has bestowed upon him certain powers to lead our country.
Well, I have two questions, and one of them follows that because Trump has mentioned that specifically now in recent interviews. To me, and I'm saying this, not you, but I think Trump is throwing a lot of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And now the religious thing is just one more thing he's throwing. And he had suggested that God believes that he has a purpose, quote, to save America and maybe the world. And that is why he survived last month's assassination attempt. He pinned some of the blame for the shooting, as you know, on President Biden, and he's folded in Kamala Harris because you're running against Kamala Harris. And he was sticking with this religious theme by claiming that he would win in California if Jesus were in charge of voting in the state.
Counting voting. Not voting, counting voting. I think
oh, is that right? I see. All right.
Jesus would be the Secretary of State against running the elections. His implication with that was that the elections are not run above board, and Jesus is so ethical that if you had an honest broker running the elections, he would win, because when he travels the state, he sees so many different Trump signs, and he thinks that a lot more people are with him than.
I see. Sure. Well, I mean, he's got, to be fair, Jesus is more ethical. I mean, I got to say.
This is a word from the Lord, and he's not happy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, more ethical than who, but he's supposed to be top of the ethical pyramid. Right. But the other thing I wanted to get to, so that's the religious side, so he's throwing that against the wall. I really want to get your thoughts on a couple of Kamala Harris spots that have just dropped, and I'm going to show them in a second. But I wanted to I hadn't planned to ask you about this, but I'm going to now. The 30,000-foot view of the Trump cultish, as you suggested, almost religious fervor that's there. I don't think it goes away. MAGA land, MAGA, forever. I don't think it goes away with Donald Trump. I think it is now. If he loses, we'll really kind of road test this theory. I feel it's sort of a generational thing. I think it's going to take a long time to purge, if the country will ever be truly purged of it, or even just to dilute the kind of fervor that there is on the MAGA side of things.
I don't know if we know. I think that what we saw and have seen in Kamala Harris's dramatic rise, where she's basically said very little, is this extraordinary hunger in this country for the next president of the United States not to be Joe Biden and not to be Donald Trump. I think there are a huge percentage of people that are exhausted with not only politics, but the tone of our politics that Trumpism represents. And it's very interesting that so many of the speakers, including the Obamas and others, when talking about Kamala Harris, almost viewed her as an extension and successor to Barack Obama and not to Joe Biden, because they tie, and you heard this continuously talking to people in on the stage, Joe Biden's last 4 years as a continuation of Trumpism, that Donald Trump never went away. The entire time that Joe Biden has been president, he's been omnipresent. You think about the beginning of his term. He was impeached a couple weeks later. He went on trial, all the indictments, he's always been chirping. He's kind of always been right there for Joe Biden. There was a moment where it seemed like he would be at Mar-a-Lago in exile. Then Kevin McCarthy goes there, the party embraces him. He gets indicted. His poll numbers go up. He runs for president. He's always been there. And this sort of feeling that way of politics, that there is this exhaustion with it and a wanting to move to something else, whether it be going back to the Obama era or sort of a fresher, newer version of that. And that's where a lot of the hope is with Kamala Harris. And I don't think that's just Democratic partisans. We have seen through election after election that a lot of the most Trumpy candidates that he has endorsed that don't have the name Donald Trump have consistently lost races that Republicans should be winning. So some of that indicates the fact that maybe there is a hunger among the country to move on from some of this Trumpism and the way that politics is. Look, there's no doubt that there's 40% of the country that is totally with him, but you can't win elections with that. You need more than that. And if he loses, is he ready to give up? Is he going to run again? Part of the brilliance from a sort of evil genius perspective of the fact that he never concedes that he loses is that it stops the party from having a reflection of why did we lose when they don't believe that they lost. Right? So you can't analyze what are we doing wrong if you think that you won. And that puts the onus on the Democrats did wrong, not us. But big picture, that's very bad for actually analyzing the state of politics.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's like a religious faith never being able to question, does God exist? Because you have to presume God's existence to even be in the faith to begin with. So you never really have that discussion. In political terms, you've stated it so beautifully. All right. I want you to look at a couple of Kamala Harris spots. They're new. At least one of them is brand new. And tell me if you think this stuff is effective or not, just from a media standpoint, because you are a media guy. Tony, do you have that? Yeah, here we go. Here's a new Harris.
Donald Trump's back, and he's out for control.
I would have every right to go after them.
Complete control.
I will wield that power very aggressively.
And he has a plan to get it.
Detailed plans for exactly what our movement will do.
It's called Project 2025, a 922-page blueprint to make Donald Trump the most powerful president ever, overhauling the Department of Justice, giving Trump the unchecked power to seek vengeance, eliminating the Department of Education, and defunding K-12 schools, requiring the government to monitor women's pregnancies, and severe cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Donald Trump may try to deny it, but those are Donald Trump's plans.
Well, revenge does take time, I will say that. And sometimes revenge can be justified.
He'll take control, we'll pay the price.
I'm Kamala Harris.
Yeah, so you get the idea. They're tying him to Project 2025. Thoughts on that ad and trying to tie him to 2025?
I'm not sure who that's supposed to necessarily appeal to. I mean, I think a lot of the folks that will be moved by that ad are the people like you and I that are really into this stuff, that understand what Project 2025 is, that have read some of the fine print, that are looking at this. And my guess is a lot of those folks are probably voting for her anyways. I think the people that they really need in the swing states are people that may be more concerned about the price of food to feed their kids, the price of gas, the idea of is an undocumented person going to take away a job that I think that I deserve? How are we going to be able to make ends meet in terms of the economy? And if I have an unwanted pregnancy, what are my options? Those are things that I think most Americans probably have more of a connection to than Project 2025. What do you think?
And the recriminatory nature of Trump's general footing on all things, that everything is about revenge, and he's got Project 2025. I felt like that was all rolled into that spot, but I think you're right. which is the people who care about that are already never Trumpers, or they're already voting against Trump. So that spot may not hit and land with the people that you need it to hit and land with. It may reinforce certain notions among those that already have doubts about Trump, but play the second spot. This is the very newest spot. And this addresses the border.
The choice is simple. Kamala Harris.
Go back to the beginning. I
supports-
talked over the beginning. I hate to talk over a voiceover artist, being one myself. Go ahead.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Kamala Harris supports spending more money to stop human traffickers. Donald Trump blocked money to stop human traffickers. Kamala Harris prosecuted transnational gang members and got them sentenced to prison. Trump is trying to avoid being sentenced to prison. There's two choices in this election: the one who will fix our broken immigration system, and the one who's trying to stop her.
Now, that addresses directly one of the issues to which you referred, which is the border. How do you feel about that spot?
It's a good spot. I mean, but it doesn't. I think it could end with a broader theme. It's interesting. I was at an event the other night with my pal Brian Tyler Cohen, who I know you know, who has this new book, Shameless, that just came out, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And he was being interviewed by Jon Favreau, the host of Pod Save America, who of course was Obama's chief speechwriter back in 2008. And I asked both of them at this event about what is the message, and specifically to Jon Favreau, of how do you talk to the undecided voters in the swing states, a message that really will resonate with them, that they care about, that they can understand. And Favreau, who has done this for a living at a very high level, very successfully for a long time, said, the basic message that he thinks resonates the most is this idea of he's for him and she's for you, which is something that Bill Clinton talked about during his speech last week. This idea that don't count the lies for Donald Trump, count the eyes.
Right.
That if he was a tenor, he would be singing me, 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 me. And that I think is an effective thing, because it goes to what a lot of people already necessarily think about him. Because a lot of the folks, if you talk to people that are casual Trump supporters, not the sort of religious type, but people that are like, I don't really love either one of them, but I think that my 401k is going to be better around Trump, or I like the policies. I don't love the man. I like the policies, and I feel like the Democrats are too liberal, so I think I'm going with Trump, and I won't love it, but I'm going with Trump. The challenge is those people who may be persuadable is to make the point to them that Donald Trump's not looking out for you. Donald Trump's looking out for him. So what that ad doesn't include is the reason he was blocking all that stuff was because he didn't want to fix the problem. He wanted to stop Joe Biden from getting a political win because he thought it would be bad for him. So it's not about the problem. It's not about you. It's not about the border. He doesn't care about the border. He just cares about his own political poll numbers. That's what the last part of that ad doesn't do. Right, which is
true, and you know, in a 30-second spot, you can only do so much. Right. I like the she supports this. It's
a good ad.
He is against this. Yeah, it's a good ad from that standpoint. But of course, you're right. The whole story is even more damning. It's just that in a 30-second spot, you really can't do much.
But that's the framing, at least, that Favreau was suggesting to sort of make all your themes through that. This idea that you think that even if he's selfish, that he's on your side, when in reality, he's only on his side. And he doesn't actually really care about any of these issues. He talks about building a wall and immigration as his #1 thing. And then he has a chance to fix the issue. And of course, he stops from fixing it because he doesn't actually care if it's fixed. He spends most of his life arguing that he's pro-choice. And then all of a sudden, he thinks it's politically advantageous to appoint justices who are not. They overturn Roe v. Wade, and now he realizes that that's politically damaging for him, and so he's kind of trying to walk it back. It's like, what are his core beliefs? Now, there's an argument. You could say, what are Kamala Harris's core beliefs? As she's moved on a lot of different positions and spent much of her life being cautious not to take a lot of controversial opinions. And as she now starts to do interviews, that's going to be a big challenge for her, is sort of defining what her worldview is, other than I'm not Joe Biden, I'm not Donald Trump, I'm younger, I'm fresher, I'm generic Democrat. What does she really believe in at her core gut? And how does that impact the race going forward?
In my last minute with you or so, I'd like to ask you about just that, which is the policy thing. You know, she hasn't come forth with enough specific policies. Now, I'm going to argue that the media, and I have great respect for you as a media guy, because I don't, as I've just mentioned in the intro to you, I feel as though you're kind of the new media while still working in linear media, but you're also working in the, so I see you kind of maybe as the bridge, you know, in many ways from legacy media to new media. So, but still that may give you even better perspective on this question, which is, I'm hearing from the media she needs to sit down for an interview, and I get it. She is sitting down, okay? But again, I'd suggest that was mostly from the media, and that backbeat was picked up, you know, and then at some point it achieves a certain virality, and you reach a certain threshold, and you'll even hear it from members of the public. But the public doesn't give a damn about a sit-down interview. Most of these sit-down interviews don't really do any kind of serious number in terms of people watching anyway. They're very big inside the Beltway, but otherwise. But more to the point, now she's got to get into policy. You know, unless she lays down some specifics on economics, I don't see how Kamala Harris can get away with not saying and committing to various policy positions. Well, I look at Donald Trump. I don't see a lot of policy positions from him. I see clever name-calling. I see mudslinging. I see some things that he says, but these are broad statements about national security, et cetera. He doesn't lay down a lot of X's and O's, yet there is this demand for the Democrats. I find this typically breaks that way, but certainly in this case, Kamala Harris, to lay out X's and O's. Give me some thoughts on how successful you can be, and this is my general notion, without laying out a bunch of specifics. Do what Trump is doing. Keep it on the generic side.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, you know, sort of living in the social media space and reading a lot of comments, which is probably not a very healthy thing to do. But
well, it's not reality, but it's a temperature taking of some kind.
Democrats and progressives, what I've seen in my personal experience, tend to have a lot more purity tests when it comes to policy than Republicans, who just basically say, are you on our team? Are you not on our team? If you're on our team, great, welcome. And if you're not, you're a horrible person. Basically, is like what it comes down to, where Democrats want every single thing. And there's a lot more intra-party fighting. And part of why Kamala Harris has been able to avoid that in this very unusual situation of getting the nomination without having to go through any sort of primary fight, without having to do debates, without having to articulate any sort of worldview, basically just be handed the nomination, is she's avoided having to get into any of those fights. And so right now, everybody is behind her, because what does she stand for? I'm not Donald Trump, and I'm not Joe Biden. And I'm basically generic Democrat, which is a really good place, which is why the race has now reset to where it should be, basically, which is 50-50. Our country is divided. Biden was so underperforming all of the Democratic Senate candidates and all the rest of it because Biden was the problem, not them, not Democrats. Biden was the problem. So now Harris gets you back to basically 50-50. But to get more than that, you need a little bit more. Do I think that most people in this country are obsessed with policy stuff? No. I don't think most people understand most of the policy stuff, nor do they care. I mean, there's been a lot made of this idea of like of a vibes election, but I really do think a lot of it does come down to vibe, especially a presidential race, which is different than any other race. It's different than a Senate race or a city council race, where a lot of people don't know the people, don't feel a connection to them, and don't care. The presidential candidates are in your face every day. You do have a personal connection. You do know who their family members are. You do see different pictures of them. It is somebody that is going to be a figure in your life every single day, that sort of person. And I do think that you know, this connection of, do I connect to this person? Do they basically have my interests at heart? Could I see them every day and feel okay about it and feel good about a country being led by that person? I think is more at the core of what most people do in terms of deciding than, oh my God, that policy in Project 2025 or this white paper or whatever it was is not. I just don't think that's where most people are. I think it's a personal connection to a presidential candidate that you just don't have on any other race. What do you think?
That's why pictures are so powerful. The Dukakis picture of him with the tank and the helmet askew. It left people with a bad taste. It wasn't about a policy that Michael Dukakis had in that presidential election. Ronald Reagan's wondrous quality, which was all associated with him being an actor, I'd suggest, just his ease in front of the camera and in front of the mic. George Bush, the younger, he's the guy I would want to have a beer with at a barbecue. I mean, these are the kinds of things. I think you're right. It's just a general vibe, gut you feel.
And look, when you looked at Joe Biden, and God bless him for all that he's done for the country, and you saw him on the debate stage, nobody could listen to anything he was saying because all they could focus on was the fact of the way that he looked, right? You couldn't get past that. When you look at Kamala Harris, almost every single time you see her, she's smiling. She looks great in every picture. She looks great in every picture she's taken for the last 20 years. Right. Yeah. And there is something, Chris Matthews wrote about this in Hardball 25 years ago, that usually the presidential candidate who looks like they have the sunshine on them is the one that wins, even if the policies are different. And go back through history, Bill Clinton over Bob Dole. You think about George Bush over Al Gore. George Bush seemed like he was more fun. You look Barack Obama over John McCain and over Mitt Romney, and even Donald Trump, who on TV was just more fun than Hillary Clinton, especially back then. And so I think there's this feeling. And the question with Donald Trump at this point in his life, John Favreau also on the issue is last week, I'll quote him again. I asked everybody for one word for Trump and one word for Harris. Obviously, they were biased because it was mostly Democrats, but Favreau's word for Donald Trump was stale. And the question is Donald Trump past his expiration date? Is his shtick, which was so fresh and so interesting back in 2016 for so many people, obviously not for the people watching this, but for so many people that just was curious, is it now stale? Is he like milk that's soured and you just don't want, it just smells bad and it looks kind of wrong and it feels like it's time for something new, throw that out, time to get something new. And that could ultimately be part of his undoing. Part of the reason he loved running against Joe Biden was that Joe Biden looked more stale than him. But now you've got this, right? You've got this fresh, new, smiley, fun, woman, mixed race, like all the things that looks like the future of America. Kamala Harris looks like the future. And Donald Trump looks like the past, which is why her best line that she's using is "we're not going back."
Yeah, it
feels like going back to another era where she's looking towards a new era.
But we should be reminded, and implicit in what you've said is this fact that a lot of people like being back, and a lot of people don't like the future, and they see in Kamala Harris things they don't like America being, mixed race among them. I mean, I think this is a country, sadly, where there's a strong undercurrent of racism and sexism that continues, And
if you notice, and I'll end with this because I'm sure you have to move on, but if you noticed during the convention, especially on Thursday night, the big night, her night, they never mentioned any of that stuff. Never talked about her being a woman, never talked about her being black, she talked about her mom and her mom being Indian, but she never talked about her black side, never talked about the historic nature. Look at the issues that they highlighted. They weren't highlighting big progressive issues. They weren't talking about San Francisco. They were talking about veterans. They brought on the military veterans that were from Congress. They gave out American flags to every person in the room. They talked about generic concepts like shooting people is bad. They didn't talk about how they would stop it. They just talked about the concept that shooting people is bad. They kept things poll tested, highly They had swing state governors. You didn't see Gavin Newsom on stage. You saw Roy Cooper. You saw Gretchen Whitmer. You saw popular people from the states that matter. The entire apparatus is not leaning into any of what you're talking about because they realize that that scares people. So what they're doing instead is trying to make her not threatening. And they know that the one weakness for a female candidate is toughness in people's minds. So if you notice, if you watch, the one word that almost every single person said that night is Kamala Harris is tough. So that's their way of combating the female thing without actually talking about the female thing. When I went to the same convention for Hillary Clinton, there were lots of mentions of that glass ceiling. I mean, when we were in New York on election night where I was covering there was literally a glass ceiling that was supposed to break that never broke, which was so
yeah.
impressive.
They had all the glass ceiling stuff and celebrations preloaded. And
but Harris doesn't lean into that at all, because the people that are focused on that, they're already with her with that, and they know that the people in the middle that they really need are not interested in that. They're more curious about, how are you going to help my life?
I love you sort of recapitulated a lot of what the DNC was about. I really like that summary, because at the end of it, I even thought, wow, if you take out abortion rights here, this is so middle of the road that it could almost be a GOP convention.
Right.
It was remarkable, really strong on defense, as you suggested, and some of these other issues that poll so favorably. So you take the abortion thing out, and there are no progressive policies being articulated at that DNC. It was a clear, conscious decision, as you've suggested.
And the Republicans did the opposite. They were so confident at that point that they talked about deporting millions of undocumented people. They talked about, he picked J.D. Vance, who is, basically like a Trump 2.0 kind of candidate. They felt so good that they didn't need to lean in. And Trump, I watched the prompter for both of them because I was on the floor, and he went off prompter for almost an hour.
That was one of the things I loved about that piece you did from the RNC. Alex showed the prompter, and then he showed the podium. This is all happening live, and Trump's there at the podium, and he said, you can see that Trump is just completely off prompter now, and he was just riffing.
And so Harris stuck to this very disciplined, probably very poll-tested message, didn't go off a script, and Trump didn't. And there's a lot of people on the right who view that, look at Trump, look what he can do. He doesn't need a prompter. But then there's other folks that would say, well, that's also proof of no discipline.
Sure.
Wouldn't you want to work hard on this speech and have something thought out and articulate a message? And maybe this isn't the moment to be doing improv theater. So different perspective.
Yeah. Well, Trump believes in Trump as he feels the rest of us should. So he was believing in it in that moment. We have many Southern California viewers and listeners. What's on the issue is this week?
I think this week, barring some big sporadic breaking news, is actually a special where we're trying to go away from politics. A special that I've been working on for a long time on Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, who created the largest gang intervention program in the country. This priest who for 40 years has been hiring ex-convicts and people that have been struggling with addiction, giving them jobs, giving them hope, giving them a sense of being. They've had such productive lives. He just earlier this year got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Joe Biden as the country's top honor. He's unbelievable. And I think at this moment, it'd be nice to take a bit of a break from the divisive political stuff to be reminded what life's all about. There he is. Yep. Show him with my homies.
Good stuff.
Let's hope that there isn't some big breaking story and we have to put this on hold, which we put on hold like 3 or 4 times already.
I see. Oh, that's why you say that, because it's been bumped before. I see.
Yeah. We've only had like a shooting of a presidential candidate and one dropping out. Stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I come to think of it. It's been an eventful couple of months. All right, good stuff, Alex. We love that you spend time with us, and your stuff we really enjoy. So thanks again. Alex Michaelson, everybody.
Good to see you.
Salam, pal. Thanks. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.